Hello, everyone. Welcome to our personal statement workshop. My name is Elba Munoz, and I am the Assistant Director and Instructor for the postbac programs here at Keck Graduate Institute. I've been here about 7 years now, and I realized that the personal statement is something that is very important. For applying to scholarships, applying to postbac programs. And when I was approached to do this workshop, I was very excited to be able to provide some resources to get you jump started or to point you into that direction with your personal statement journey. So I did title this why is my personal statement such an important piece to my application? And I hope that throughout the workshop, you'll be able to get those, questions answered as well too, that you may have about creating your personal statement. So a little more about me. I was born in East LA to Mexican immigrant parents. When I was about 4 years old, my parents moved to Pomona, where I was raised, and I attended public school. So I am first generation to attend college and earn a master's degree. I also had to do a career changer postbac program to get into my master's degree program. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about that as well too. So I'm excited that I've been advising pre-health students for the last 11 years of my career as an educator. Some fun facts or hobbies about me. I've been raising plants since I was a kid, and since I could remember. Gardening's been one of the things that it's one of my passions, and I love doing that. I have one son, so I also talk about that I love raising plants, and one human child, and I love animals. I'm a dog person. I have 2 dogs, and we have a tortoise. His name is Joaquin, and he's just the sweetest little tortoise. And we hope to grow our animal farm soon one day. I love coffee. I'm a coffee enthusiast. I'm also an amateur iPhone photographer. So I love taking pictures. So I'm working on my skill there. So that's just a little bit about me. And let's jump in and just kind of get into the meat of this workshop. So think of the personal statement as an opportunity for you to be able to share more about your story and your journey of who you are. And it's an opportunity to allow others to get to know you on a bit more of a personal level. And think of this as an opportunity to create an impression. And I will go over, some tips on how to do that. Oftentimes, when we think of branding or self-branding or brands of products that we are, more comfortable with, that's really what it comes down to. So your personal statement, think of it as your personal branding. It's an opportunity for you to, as we tell our students here at KGI, like it's your hashtag, like how do you want to be remembered? When you set up your self-branding, it's an opportunity for the admissions committees of, health professions or scholarships, so to speak, to get to know who you are and also know what to expect when they get to meet you for a potential interview. So these are some things to hopefully start getting you to think about those, characteristics of yourself that you may not be, you may not be able to articulate that yet, but hopefully through this workshop and these exercises, you might be able to kind of have a better sense of how you want to frame your personal statement. So I often refer to the personal statement as your movie trailer. It's a sneak peek of who you are. It's an opportunity to also sell yourself beyond the metrics and to share and demonstrate your commitment to medicine. So again, think about this as an opportunity to sell yourself beyond the metrics. And just like in movie trailers, they don't have everything in that movie trailer. At least nowadays, they don't do that. Back in the 80s and 90s, they used to show a short clip from a movie. and that was their trailer. But nowadays, modern trailers have a little bit of everything to hope that you get an understanding of what to expect when you are watching a movie. So I think of the personal statement in that same analogy. And so I will pause periodically. I do have GIFs on my slide deck as well too, just makes it a little bit more interesting. So this next slide are some possible topics and themes to consider. So again, the personal statement has a job to do, and these are some considerations for you to think about. What do you want to share? For starters, you can use something to share about your motivation, like what drives you to want to be a physician, a PA, dentist, or even talk about like why not a teacher or nurse or scientist. So these are some like, ideas for you to start brainstorming on that. The other thing that I would tell you to consider putting in your personal statement would be to talk a little bit about your family background. Again, your personal statement is going to give highlights. So again, you may not have the character space or character count space to include a lot of details. So you have to be very intentional with every sentence, every paragraph, even every word that you want to put in that personal statement so that you can make the best out of the space that you have to write this. So with the extracurricular activities, I get this question asked a lot, and this is why I put this consideration here as well too for topics or themes. There might be some experiences that you've gone through that you want to share what you've learned or that helped further solidify your journey into medicine. That could be work experience or even a personal experience. I've had students ask me, is it okay to put a personal experience because that's what planted the seed for my desire to go into medicine. So again, I want you to personalize this as best as possible. There will be a lot of I and me statements in this personal statement. So make sure that it is true to who you are and that at the end of the personal statement, you can have someone read it and be able to point out certain things that are uniquely to you. Most pre-health students will have similar extracurricular activities like clinical experiences, things like that, or volunteer, but try to hone in and find out and identify like what is unique to you, what are your passions, and focus on those bits. As far as the conclusion, one of the things that I tell folks, think about your vision. What are your future plans? What is your long and short term goals that you want to anticipate, or how do you want to serve others through the degree that you are seeking, and what is going to be your contribution to society? Is there a particular population you want to serve? What do you have to offer? So that to me is what I recommend my students to include for their conclusion, and it makes it for a much more impactful and lasting impression for the conclusion. Lastly, you may want to consider addressing any shortcomings or explaining or addressing why there's multiple MCAT scores. This shouldn't be the focus of your personal statement, but it should rather be a very tiny paragraph or just a few sentences to explain what happened briefly, and then how you grew from that and how you overcame that. Oftentimes admissions committees for health professions want to see resiliency. And so explaining that shortcoming or clarifying something on your application would be ideally the best spot would be to put it in the personal statement. There aren't other places that you can address any of those things in there. So sometimes students want to address like why they needed to do a post-bac, or there was like a severe dip on their, everyone's personal statement is different, but I would say the best spot to include those would be in the personal statement. I'll take a pause here. I welcome any questions if you want to address them in the chat, or you're more than welcome to speak up. Go ahead, Adrian.
All right, so I kind of have two questions. I think the first one's has more priority. So in terms of possible themes and topics, would it be more practical to have a nice spread and variety of these like motivation, background, and all this, or would you prefer like a depth in one or two of these themes?
It depends. You want to be careful to not list too many things. I would say if I had to, pick a number, I would say 2 to 3, topics that you want to cover in your personal statement. Of course, I would say the absolute things that need to be in there is, who you are, or make sure that that is across the personal statement and really answering the prompt, why medicine, why PA, or why this post-bac in that personal statement. And let me know if you need more clarification on that question.
No, that makes sense, because if we were to go back to the movie trailer analogy, it's like if there's too many things going on, you're kind of confused and you probably don't want to watch the movie. It's like, it's, I don't know. So yeah, that'll explain the question. And the second one is, I don't know if you'll cover this later on in the presentation, but in terms of future plans, how would you strike a good balance between being too idealistic or naive and kind of being more, because as someone who's not really in the workforce yet, but is wanting to go into medicine, let's say, how do you kind of temper that and not just say, I want to do all these different things, and then someone will look at you and say, okay, well, you have a good clinical experience, but it's not really being applied in a realistic manner?
That's a great question. So the balance to answering this or sharing why these future plans is really important. And I like how you address, like, you don't want to have too many things in that conclusion, but I would focus on, like, what do you want to be the main takeaway? Some people like to include that they want to serve the underserved, or they want to serve, the geriatric population, or they want to serve, their local community. So I would say, think about and reflect, what is the main takeaway that you want to be remembered by? There are some admissions colleagues that will share with me that sometimes they're so busy reading these personal statements that they get a chance to only read the first paragraph and the conclusion. And so that sticks with me in the back of my mind. And I tell students, like, think about making everything count, but it's your why medicine should be addressed in the intro paragraph, and what you can offer, or what is your passion or your future goal, should be in the conclusion. Of course, you want to embed it all throughout the personal statement and be intentional with that, but just keep that in mind. And another tip is that you can't please all of the admissions committees and trying to tailor it for one school. You do have to generalize not your story, but necessarily, like, make sure that you have the understanding that your audience is going to be, lots of medical schools, or lots of health professions, or lots of post-bac programs that are going to be reading your application. If you are tailoring your personal statement to one particular school and not using a CAS system, then that's a different case, where you do want to tailor it to maybe sharing that you understand what that curriculum is, or why that excites you, those types of details. Great question. Are there any other questions before I move on? I see some new folks. Welcome. All right, if there are any other questions, I will proceed. So these are just, gosh, there's so many things to cover, and these are just a few keys to success to keep in mind and to help you as you are drafting your personal statement. So you do want to focus on a few illustrative experiences. My students will say, so does that mean you want me to write very flowery and not as sciencey? And I said, correct. So think about, this is an opportunity for you to also demonstrate your creativity, as well as be able to be very intentional with the words that you're using, and being very descriptive. So just keep that in mind. Your overall personal statement should unite with the theme. I should be able to read the personal statement and identify this is your unique theme. You could have a couple, but I would probably limit it to 2 as an overarching theme on there, no more than 2, because it can be busy, or it might be too much for the reader to, grasp what it is that you want them to get. So be very mindful to not overwhelm the reader either. I would say for starting off the personal statement, some people just like to write it out. I do believe that writing is half the battle. And so just writing it all out, putting it on paper, it will take several drafts for you to get through that personal statement, to be at a place where you feel comfortable in sharing that with, potential letter writers or your PI, or, whoever you want to get feedback for, or for even applying with that personal statement. It takes several drafts to get through that process. And this process is very reflective. And sometimes you'll get that light bulb moment and realize like, oh gosh, I should include this. And so it takes time. So I do want to warn you that it's okay. It's going to take time to get this done. I wouldn't recommend applying to an opportunity like the night before. You want to make sure you have like a core, piece of what you plan to include in that personal statement by outlining, in case there's an opportunity for a scholarship, or you want to apply for a job, or something like that, that you already have like this like core piece of unique things that you're going to cover in that personal statement, and then you can just adjust. So your personal statement will evolve and it will change over time. So make sure that you keep that in mind. And so as you grow in your journey, it's going to keep growing and it's going to change. So I tell folks to make sure you include your passions, but you want to show what those passions are without necessarily saying it. I know that's a little bit tricky. There are some folks who do struggle with showing and not telling, or what does that really mean? So it's basically you are sharing a story, or giving the reader insight to who you are without saying, I am passionate about serving the underserved. So they might include a experience of them doing a brigade, or the local community clinic where they would volunteer, things like that. So those are the ways that you can show without telling. Any questions so far? I'm not going to go through all of these because I also want to leave more time for questions in case you might have them. And again, one of the things that I tell folks, make sure you keep in mind your theme, your overarching theme. You don't want to introduce anything super new in the conclusion, because that could potentially, in my opinion, confuse the reader. So you want to make sure that everything aligns with your timeline as well too. So sometimes folks like to start off with a reflection in the beginning of the intro and then kind of answer the why medicine at the bottom. I've seen that happen before. Or some folks like to start off with their background. A lot of folks say, well, what is the biggest cliche and things like that? So I'll cover that in the next slide, because I think that might be helpful for you to keep in mind. The most important thing I would say is try to avoid inconsistency between your essay and your interviews. So what that means is be true to yourself and make sure that you are sharing with the readers who you are truthfully in that sense. So it makes more sense to me to make sure you just share who you are and try not to appeal to the masses, so to speak. So in doing so, that helps to avoid inconsistency. So think about it, the admissions committee or whoever's reading it might be able to pick up on something that may not be, I guess people would say like it could be like a potential red flag or something like that. So make sure that you have a uniting theme for your essay, as well as there are uniting themes for your extracurriculars. And so when you go for your interview, make sure that you read your materials again and make sure that you focus on those key points, because what's on your application is probably what gave you that interview opportunity. So keep that in mind. And so that's just a big tip, kind of thinking further along the ways about that. Don't relist things on your CAS application. You want to use specific incidents to show what has been gained and what will be brought to their program. You may feel like I need to get into this program because I need to do X, Y, and Z, but also be intentional in what you can offer. And so that, again, that's reflection on your unique qualities and characteristics that you can offer their program as well, and help grow their campus community. So that's also another thing that admissions committees think about, like what can they bring to further increase their community as a whole, and how do they diversify that? So just think about that. So a couple of common tendencies that I tell folks, like, try to avoid these. Starting off your personal statement, it's not on here, but with a question. Oftentimes I see personal statements start off with a question, and then they kind of go on into answering that. That's pretty common. Or started off with, I was born in East LA, my parents came from, so I typically see personal statements that start off with that. Try to avoid making it into an itinerary or resume style. So again, this is where you may not be able to share everything that you want to share, but again, focus on those highlights, the movie trailer, right? Oftentimes I see folks put in excessive vocabulary and have these like long-winded, complex words. So try not to do that. I think shorter and sweet to the point is better. And it also helps save character counts. I often tell students, like, try to sentence squish and consolidate, replace certain words to shorten that sentence, because if they're too long-winded, you don't want to lose the reader, right? Again, generic statements or cliches, or Webster's dictionary said X, Y, and Z. I see that a lot as well too. Most importantly, make sure that you're being honest. This one's a little tricky. With the personal statement, there will be additional I and me statements that need to be on there. That's normal. But not every sentence should have I or me. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to make sure that you tie everything back to yourself when you are sharing about an experience. So adding more of that reflection about that experience, or what was your thought process, or how did that solidify your choice into going into X, Y, and Z would be most helpful. This is another, I would say, common thing that I see is people praising or talking about other people or listing someone else's name in the personal statement. For example, Dr. Garcia inspired me because, and so I'll see like Dr. Garcia for like all throughout, 2 paragraphs or all throughout the personal statement. It's okay to address them maybe a few times, but again, you want to keep the focus on yourself and make sure that you are the one that's remembered after being or after reading the personal statement, right? Again, you want to come across as like, this is your personal statement. Yes, they inspired you to do this, but you want to tie it back to yourself. And it's just some tips that I tell folks to just kind of consider and think about. You're going to be revising a lot. Try to eliminate filler words. I know it's a little bit harder. Some folks have a lot of descriptive words, but just do your best to try to avoid filler words. Drop it into Grammarly. It's a free resource. Have someone else look at it, read it out loud. If you have access to Word doc that reads it out loud for you, just pause and let it read it to you so you can hear if there's anything that sounds awkward or doesn't make sense, and make sure that, again, the timeline is correct on there. Use every word to count and make good use of that language or word choices that you use. This one's another tip that I have for students. Share it with an acquaintance. So, and after they read it, ask them questions like, what did you learn from reading this personal statement? Can you identify certain characteristics? And see if they can paint a picture of who you are. And then you also want to share it with someone that knows you incredibly well, because that person's going to tell you or remind you, hey, you forgot to talk about this, or, these particular things that I know about you doesn't come across in the personal statement. You do want to be mindful to not share it with so many people, because you're going to get so much feedback that it might be too, I guess, too busy with the feedback. And so it could be complicated to try to like catch everything there. And so before I get started on this part here, do you have any questions so far? Because I'm going to cover a little brainstorming with you all so that you can kind of have an idea what to get started with for your personal statement. You're more than welcome to put in the chat or, raise your hand and unmute yourself. All right, seeing that there are no questions. This is a little brainstorming exercise, or, like a little spider web type of brainstorming or outlining. Everyone's different, but I like a visual for you all to see, like, what are some things to keep in mind. And so, the question we had earlier about putting different things, you can absolutely put those different things, but I think some core tenets that for me personally that I like to see in personal statement is I like to identify, like, what's their background? How did they came about, pursuing this journey? I like to see, like, when the seed was planted, right? I'm a gardener, so I like to see that. It's okay to have a couple of experiences to talk about, because your experience is your further evidence to showcase who you are, and also that supporting information. So I call it the evidence components. Think about including what is unique to you. You may not want to put, like, what is unique to me is that I am friendly. Like, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, what are your passions that make you stand out from other people? And it's not necessarily to compare yourself to other people, but it's more so to think about, like, again, what can you offer the admissions committee, and how do you want to be remembered by that? And then lastly, if there is space and if you do have to address hardships and challenges, you can include that as well. Otherwise, you want to include who you want to serve in the community, again, for your conclusion paragraph. And so these are just some tips. Again, this is it. I want you to also take ownership of your personal statement. These are suggestions. There are people who might give you different advice about what to include. But again, after reading the personal statement, it should, again, be able to represent you and why you are seeking that opportunity. Any questions so far here? All right. Yeah, that was my next slide. Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And if there aren't any questions, I see some new people. I would love to get to know you. I will ask you those once I stop the recording as well, too, for folks' privacy. Any other questions about the personal statement or anything else that you might have been thinking about? Go ahead, Jenna.
So what I was really doing with my personal statement was kind of revamping it from when I had used it to apply for medical school. Is that something that you say would be okay to do, or would you say, like, start fresh kind of with a new idea?
I love this question, Jenna. So I want to answer this. There are certain key components that are going to still be consistent with you, like those particular experiences, right? So if we were to say, like, what would be your most memorable experiences? Like, those are still going to be your most memorable experiences, like 5 years from now or 2 years from now, right? So there's going to be core pieces of your personal statement or like older personal statement that you still want to keep. So you can refresh it in the way that you tell the story, or in the way that you create a different unifying theme, or that you cover a creative way to say those pieces as well too. So again, there's going to be certain key components that will be there that I see in different personal statements. I've seen personal statements for students that have applied to, undergrad and then their post-bac and then for medical school. There's going to be some key components that I can recognize, if I were to look at their older personal statements. So I would say in that aspect, you can, as they say, recycle certain components, but I would say in refreshing the way you tell that story would also be helpful. And then I do like to have students highlight certain things, like what part do you think talks about your background? And so they would highlight and see like 3 sentences. And I was like, do you think that's enough information for the reader? And they're like, well, it doesn't really answer who I am as much. It's just kind of gives them a little glimpse. So you can use different colors to highlight your personal statements to help you identify. Or what I like to do is, when you get an essay prompt and there's like multiple questions that need to be addressed or things that need to be addressed, I highlight them different colors and then make sure that you go through and highlight like, that it's capturing all of those things. Yeah, and make sure that it's balanced. So again, because the applications to health professions programs and scholarships and even for, post-bac programs, it has to be very intentional. So they want to gain information from you. They also want to know who you are. So that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps. And let me know if you need more clarifying details. Great
No,
question.
that was helpful. Thank you.
Great question. Anyone else? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and conclude this workshop to have more like one-on-one conversations with you all. So that concludes our workshop. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed this workshop. Thank you. So I will now turn off the recording.